Karen Dustman. And Karen, it's kind of hard to introduce you because you do so much and you write in quite a variety of genres. I think both fiction and nonfiction, right?
That's right. That's right. Yes. Right.
Give our audience a little bit of an introduction to yourself, who you are, maybe how you got into writing.
Oh boy, that's kind of a long topic. So,
Yes.
I'm a retired lawyer. I was a criminal prosecutor for about 9, 10 years. Done a lot of different kinds of things. I've built spec houses. I've had many different careers in my life, but the thing that I love the most is writing, and I've always come back to writing. So I think there are people in the world who are just words people, and I'm one of those people who just loves words and loves to put things on paper. So I've kind of always written, and I think that's kind of a lot of writers fall into that niche.
I think so too. I think I'm more surprised when I meet a writer who says, I just started at 42 or
Right,
whatever.
right.
I think most of them have been writing their whole lives. And as I was looking at your page, I think that you kind of got your big break as an author with a home improvement book. Is
I
that right?
did. That's exactly right. Yep, I had built spec houses and remodeled old rundown apartment buildings with an old boyfriend, and I realized these are skills that I didn't grow up learning, and there's a lot of women who didn't grow up learning them. And so it was sort of before the whole TV episodes about repairs and home improvements, but I wanted
Right, right.
women to sort of demystify some of that, like how to change a light switch or wire an outlet
Yes,
or what happens when your toilet's running all the time, that kind of stuff. So those
right.
basic skills that, my dad was a college teacher and he did not
Hmm.
those sorts of things. And it was all new to me. I actually thought it was really fun. I thought it was really interesting. So I did that home improvement book, and it did surprisingly well. It got me on some TV shows and some things right early
Yeah,
on.
I was very impressed with all of that. And so a spec house, define exactly what that is. Is it sort of like a model?
The boyfriend and I we bought the land and we had a house designed and we built it on there, knowing that we were probably going to sell it when we were done. So we did that,
Okay.
not so much to live in, but to sell. And we did a couple of those,
Okay.
not very many.
Okay. And were you doing the interior design too?
In terms of like picking carpet and things like that, or
Yes, yeah.
yeah, well, we finished the house, so we did the paint and the carpet and hired the carpet done and things like that. But we did the electrical and the plumbing. We tended to hire out the framing and the roofing and that kind of stuff. But I learned to do electrical work doing that, and I really enjoyed it. That's something I still do. When we built our house here, my current husband and I, we built our house here. I did the wiring on our house, so it's just I don't know. I like working with my hands.
That's really neat. I used to feel like I could watch videos, learn, jump in and do it, and now it's like I've got so much else going on.
I know.
But we are in the middle of a bathroom remodel. Actually, we're kind of at
Whoa.
the beginning of it. And so to me, this is terrifying. I have so much creativity in writing, in
Hmm.
music. I can write all of this stuff. I can write music. I can play a dozen instruments. That's kind of
That's a
a loose
lot of
estimation.
instruments. Yeah.
Well, and to be honest, I don't have practice time. I don't play many of them well anymore, but I taught music lessons for a long time. But when it comes to interior design, I'm looking at all these samples, I'm looking at all these textures,
Mhm.
all these patterns. I'm just like, I don't know. I have no idea. So, I'm
I
kind
get it.
of
I
crossing
get
my
it. I get it.
fingers.
And it's really hard to
Go ahead.
pick samples from these little tiny chips. So we had one house that we painted that came out looking like a pumpkin because it was that kind of orange. It didn't look like that on the chip at all. But I mean, most of those things are pretty forgiving, right? I mean, you make a mistake, you can fix it. So,
Well, what we're doing, we bought a stained glass window. I think it's meant to be like the tree of life, and we found it in an antique store, and it's a pretty big window. And the house we just left had this really neat feature where the back of the shower wall was all the kind of glass cinder blocks.
that's
And
pretty.
it looked into the kind of home gym behind it, which had
Oh,
huge windows, so you had light pouring in from everywhere.
mm,
And our shower backs up to a sunroom, so we're doing the same thing,
that's
putting in these
nice.
big stain. Yeah, so we'll have light coming in from all sides, but nobody can see them, which is important. So,
Sounds
but
like a
we're
good
trying
project.
to match. I'm excited to see it done, and I'm just starting to get excited because we're trying to match the colors in the stained glass, and I'm looking at it. One day I think this is going to look great, and I'm like, do those really go together? So
Mhm.
I thought that was neat, but it sounds like your book is more on the actual, like, maybe hanging drywall and painting
Actually,
and things like
it's
that.
more basic. The book was really more basic home repair. So,
Okay.
changing a faucet and fixing a leaky toilet and wiring, because I think it's important to demystify wiring a little bit, things like that. So wiring, plumbing, paint, simple
Was the
things.
book was it kind of geared specifically to women?
It was, and we found so many men were buying it too that they put a little starburst on the cover and said, "Okay, or great for men too," something like that.
Ah, that's neat.
Yeah.
No, one of the really neat people I've met in my life, I doubt he'll hear this, and if he does, he'll be like, "Well, then why didn't you go out with me again?" But he was a really neat guy, and he had made it his life mission that he said there are certain groups of people, for instance, women, who tend not to be taught these things
Right.
and don't know them. And he had a foundation, I guess you would call it, that he had created specifically to teach homeowner skills. And that's
They're
so
really life
important.
skills. They really are basic life skills,
Yeah.
and it's important to just feel like you can do that and you don't have to hire it all the time. Yeah.
All the time, right, right.
Right.
So, and what was the path to publication for a book like that? Did they want to know what kind of qualifications you have, or, did you
I
know
was
the right
really
people?
lucky I was really lucky with that. I had a book agent. I was very lucky to have an agent. It was again a different era, so that was in the 90s. Um, and he shopped it, and it was a very small press called Chandler House Press in New England that took it on. And I mean, I guess I had enough credentials for them because I had done enough hands-on work. And interestingly
Okay.
enough, we had women who did the illustrations for it. So it wasn't just simple line drawings. They were almost more artistic line drawings. They were beautifully done and very sensitively done. And I just thought that was the best part of the book was the illustrations. They were great. It's out of print now, so if people look for it, I don't think they can.
Oh,
I might. I
so
think
here I'm getting people all
I
excited
maybe
about
I should do
something
another
like that.
version of it, right? Reissue it or something because I think the press went under eventually, but that one's out of print for sure. But I'd love to do that one again and just use those same illustrations if I could find the illustrators again. It
Right.
was great. It
Well, I
was
think yeah, it is vital skills, and as you say, life skills. Now,
yeah,
but in addition to that, tell me about some of the other books you've written and the various genres you've written in.
right. So I guess what really got me going originally was I did a short series of newspaper articles for a small newspaper where we were living up north of LA, and I was interested in an old hotel that was it was called the Lebec Hotel, where the movie stars Clark Gable and movie stars from the 20s and 30s would go with their girlfriends sometimes, and it was kind of a remote location. And they had lots of big parties. It was a beautiful sort of 20s style, deco style hotel. And it was gone by the time I got there, but I was really interested in the story. And I met an older gentleman and his wife who had worked there for like 20 years. And they could tell us all about the history of this wonderful old hotel and the things that they'd seen there and the people who were there. And so I did a series of newspaper stories, just little short newspaper stories for the newspaper about this hotel and the people and the stories. And they'd had Lindbergh fly in with his airplane and land
Oh,
near a
neat.
lake and things like that. So I must have done 5 or 6 or 7 in an installment series. And the newspaper folks, I wasn't expecting to get paid at all. And they said it was the most interesting series to the readers that they'd had in a long, long time. And they paid me for it. And it was only like $15 an article or something. But they treated me as a professional and they loved the stories and they encouraged me to write more. And I was interested in local history. And I think in some ways that kind of sparked the whole thing. So I've done
Hmm.
since then lots and lots of books about local history and the places that we've lived. I eventually went back
And
to.
what is local to you?
I'm at the in the arm crook of California, just 3 miles from the Nevada border. So we're sort
Okay.
of an area called Carson Valley area, and there's lots of
Okay.
history here. The Immigrant Trail came through here, for example. And if you know the tale of Snowshoe Thompson, who delivered the mail over the Sierras for many, many years, he came through here.
No.
So
No.
we were a very early silver mining county that was formed on the heels of the Comstock Lode. People wanted the next big mining excitement.
Hmm.
So I wrote about this place where I live, and I wrote about the Carson Valley and the people who live there, and I did books about not just local history, but also some of the cemeteries. So anything I was interested
Hmm.
in, I wrote about. And the
Okay.
very first book that I did, I started my own press, Claridge Press, which is named after my mom, Claire. That was a book about Silver Mountain City, which was the original county seat of Alpine County, which is where I live, which is no longer there. It's a ghost of a ghost town. There's not a single stick of lumber left standing.
But
So
you
that
found a lot of history on that?
we found a lot of history about that, and it took about 8 years worth of research actually. And then I realized I can do
Wow.
books. I can do books. I can do this again. I can do it repeatedly. I can do it myself. I
Hmm.
can do the writing. I can do the publishing. The self-publishing is
Hmm.
just a wonderful innovation. So it's
It
allowed.
it is.
Hmm.
I think it's really grown and improved. I think people are really in the last 10 years holding themselves to a higher standard for the
Hmm.
most part.
Right.
And some of the early self-published books I read was like, might even be a good story, but you really needed an editor, you needed somebody to, was this first draft? But I think it's come a long way, and it is such a fantastic thing, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree. And we all do need editors, and we all do need to be holding ourselves to that higher standard. That's
Right,
important. Right.
right. Now, do you also write some fiction?
I do also write some fiction, and that's a
Okay.
kind of a new foray for me, and it's been kind of fun. So I've done all these nonfiction books for years and years and years, and I thought it would be really fun to tell a different kind of story. So I've read romance novels, and so my first book was The Captain's Kidnapped Bride, which was a romance set on a sailing ship. And there's a story behind
Okay.
that too, because I was actually a crew member on a square rig sailing ship for about 9 months. So that was a little piece of my history.
Fun.
That was really fun.
Yeah.
And I
Which
thought,
which
well,
ship were you on?
it was called the Barba Negra. It's no
Okay.
longer in existence, actually. It sank about 10 years ago, I think.
Oh no.
It was
Was
really
was that one of the recreations of the tall ship type of thing?
it kind of wasn't, it kind of wasn't. It was a boat that was built in Norway in, I'm going to say this wrong, about 1910, I think, and it wasn't originally a
Okay.
square rigged ship. And this wonderful man and his friend bought it and restored it and made it into a barkentine in a square rigged ship. And so it was part of the tall ships parades and did some fun things. So I wasn't with it for
That's
that long, but it was a real different experience for certain.
That's a fantastic experience, though. And my experience with tall ships is I don't know if you know of the Endeavor.
Yes, yes.
When it was making its tour, and I'm trying to think what year this was, I think my son was about 7, so it was the mid 90s, say.
Hmm.
And it came to Gig Harbor, Washington, where I was living at the time. So I was hired, I was paid $100 to play my fife
Oh,
on the
how
dock
wonderful.
while people waited in line. And my son had his baron, and he was playing with me. A baron's big Irish drum for anyone out there who doesn't know. So that was my experience. Plus, we got a free tour of the ship.
Oh,
And that is just, I always thought that would be the neatest thing to sail on one of those and be the crew. Did you learn to sail, or did you already have the background with your
I'm
father?
not a wonderful sailor. I have some very, very basic skills. I kind of, the owner had two teenage sons, so I sort of came on as the tutor to his sons, which really didn't happen
Oh,
that much. The sons were of an age where they didn't really want too much tutoring, but my boyfriend was the sort of the ship's engineer. So when the engine broke down, which it did fairly frequently,
hmm.
he would fix that and keep it going. But I did stand watches and, did my share of cooking and other things aboard. It was
I think that almost has to be an interview on its own about how you took those experiences and turned them into fiction. And that's your first fiction? Is it your only fiction so far, or
No,
do you
so
have
then I
more?
went on and I did two more series of books. One was a series of books that was time travel romances that are set actually in the Carson Valley area. Have you heard of Virginia City? Do you know the stories of Virginia
Yes,
City?
yes,
Okay,
I have.
so one of them was in Virginia City, and others were nearby here to where I live locally. And they were time travels
Hmm.
in the 1870s and present day, of course. So I did three of those. And then I did some present day mysteries, and that's what I've been working on recently. So I've got three of those,
Okay.
which are the hook, and that one is there's a woman who lives in her 19 I'm trying to remember what the year was, 67 Volkswagen van and travels around the country. So it
Okay.
sort of ties into the people who like the van life and just like to
Okay.
be exploring. But they're Southern mysteries, so they're all set in various towns in the South. And she's an interesting and quirky character who has an African gray with her as her pet, and I have an African gray, so there's
Oh,
a little bit
okay.
of
Well,
meanings.
now you're making me even more frustrated that I can't get to all my books. As we discussed, gardening
Yes.
just a little bit by email. I've been out there weeding till I think I've broken all my fingers weeding. It's a very dangerous occupation.
Just weeding is a
Yeah.
full-time job. Yes.
It is, and we have a farmhand, and that's actually what happened yesterday was I finally said to him, I've been meaning for weeks to look on Marketplace, get paver stones so that we can quit weeding all the time, put them
Hmm.
all over the garden. I found free bricks that had
Mm.
just been posted 22 years, not 22 years, you see, oh, I've been out in the sun too much, 22 minutes ago.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, can I come and get them? And as I told you, the pipe got broken. I was literally just covered in dirt. You know, my hair was sweaty from being under my hat. I couldn't take a shower. I had that on my mind. We had all sorts of people coming and going, and everything went out of my brain.
And you had a
So,
pretty cool contractor. I thought that was really interesting.
uh, yes, yeah. Um, so far, job's going great.
Good
So,
for
but
her.
yeah, you are actually here to talk about, I think it's your newest book.
That's right.
I
That's right.
Miami's Great Hurricane, September 18th, 1926.
That's right. Thank you. Yes. So this is what the cover looks like. It's
Very nice.
my dad was a survivor of this hurricane, which was always referred to in the time that he was growing up as the Great Hurricane. Miami's, of course, in Florida has been hit by lots and lots of hurricanes, but the one in 26 was particularly big and particularly brutal and was special in a sense because the people who were living in Miami really didn't have much advance notice of it at all, including my dad. And so I grew up hearing stories about the Great Hurricane, but only little bits and pieces. It was something he didn't talk about very much, but it was clearly a seminal point in his life. For the rest of his life, he would get very nervous whenever there was a big storm, clouds, thunder,
Mhm.
lightning, that kind of thing coming through. So it was almost like PTSD for him. And he would
Okay.
tell the story that his mom stood them in the fireplace first for security or for protection, and then she realized that was not a very safe place to be, and she moved them by a brick wall or a concrete block wall. And when he came back later, that wall had tumbled down, and so he realized he could very well have been killed in that. And they eventually
Right.
moved to some other building, an apartment building that was under construction, so it wasn't even finished yet. And they huddled there for the rest of the storm, if you can imagine. And meanwhile, his sister had just gotten married at the age of 16 and was living out on Miami Beach, and they were terrified for what might have happened to her. All they could hear was that there were rumors going around that Miami Beach had been completely inundated and everybody had been killed. She was okay,
Oh,
they had been
yeah.
rescued. They were okay, but they didn't hear for several days, and their home
Mhm.
was. You'll appreciate this as a pianist. He measured the height of the water by the water came up over the keyboard of their fill pit piano. So that, and he always talked about it was a fill pit piano. And the
I've
ivories,
never heard of a Philpid.
I'd never heard of it either. But you can imagine the height of it, right? So it'd be what, 2.5 or three
Yes.
feet. And the ivories all came off, and I said, "Well, Dad, what did you do?" He was a pianist a professional pianist. He said, "Well, we just played it without the ivories. It was fine." But so these stories caught my attention, of course, and about sometime in the early 90s, I realized I really wanted to know more about it, and I interviewed some of the other people in our family, some aunts and uncles about their experiences. And then I realized there are a lot of pictures out still about that 1926 hurricane. It was an era where the Brownie camera had come out about 1900,
Yeah.
and it was a popular camera. It was a very inexpensive camera, and everybody had
Mhm.
one and were taking pictures. So after they had gone through this horrific hurricane experience, they all came out and started taking photographs. And there are still photographs showing up on eBay today. So I started collecting photographs and collecting them
Mhm.
and collecting them and collecting stories, and I made a couple of pilgrimages to some a wonderful museum in Miami and got personal stories that they had collected in letters, things like that. And I always thought someday I'd write a book about it. And then about a year ago, I thought, okay, now's the time. I'm just motivated to write this book. And part of what motivated me was just a sense of this is the right time. But it was 1926. So next year in September will be the 100-year
Ah,
anniversary of this amazing storm.
so
And
perfect timing.
the timing just seemed like
Um,
really good timing.
where do you know where it ranks overall in all the storms in Florida? Is it like top 10, top 5?
There was a statistic. It was like the 12th most dangerous and the 12th most deadly storm of the 20th century, not the 21st, but it was certainly
Okay.
of the, there we go. It would eventually be ranked the 12th strongest and 12th deadliest storm of the entire 20th century. And it was a Category 4 hurricane, so was one notch shy of the most highest ranking as they rank hurricane.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for reference, where does Katrina fall in this and what do they say is
Oh.
the deadliest?
You know, I don't know what Katrina was. I don't know whether it was a 4 or a 5, but it was right up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it was definitely either a 4 or 5. I
It
thought
was
it might
either,
have been a 5,
it might have
but
been a
it's
5, right. And that's actually interesting. Those are the ones that we know from our generation, right? Those are the ones that we've seen
Mhm.
hit the news. Those are the ones people talk about. And the 1926 hurricane, historians in Florida tell me, well, it's not really a forgotten hurricane, but it has sort of passed out of the popular consciousness.
Right.
And when you think about people like my dad who actually lived through it as a 10-year-old, I mean, that generation is gone. He's passed
Right.
away. So we don't have that first person account anymore. And that was another reason I really wanted to bring that hurricane to people's attention. It was a very different era. We didn't have the awareness of storms coming like we do now. People in
Right.
town didn't even know it was headed their way. And
Mhm.
they didn't have the kind of FEMA response that we have available to us now. So there was the Red Cross and there were local relief efforts, and the American
Mhm.
Legion did a lot of efforts, but the kind of response was all sort of a community pulling together and the nation pulling together. So in some ways it was a really heartening story to tell. There was positives as well as negatives.
Right. Well, and I've always felt that way living in Minnesota. I don't anymore. I'm in Tennessee now,
Uh-huh.
but there were so many winters where we would get dumped, cars were stuck, and you saw people pull together and
Right.
really help each other, and the best of people came out.
It really
And
was. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I would like viewers to please like, share, and subscribe so the channel can grow, so I can bring you more authors and more wonderful books. And I think we're doing 2 readings today, so go ahead with the first one.
Okay. Well, this is from a chapter called The Storm. When the storm finally arrived, it came with great suddenness, according to a newspaperman whose name was Joe Reese. The barometer began falling about 10 p.m. on the evening of September 17th. High winds soon followed, and about midnight were blowing a fresh gale. By 1:50 the next morning, the wind had reached 57 miles an hour. Its velocity continued to rise, clocking 115 miles an hour by 5 in the morning. Only a smattering of rain had accompanied the wind initially, but around 3 a.m. the sky opened up and it began to pour. Phone service failed in Miami Beach and Hollywood, and then was lost across Miami as well. Most terrifying of all, the electricity went out all over town. Fearful residents, awakened by the noise and tumult of the storm, found themselves wrapped in inky darkness. According to a hastily issued extra edition of the Miami Daily News, newspapermen crawled across the bridge from Miami Beach to the mainland at 3 a.m. to deliver the latest reports, as rumors spread that a massive tidal wave had swept over stranded beach dwellers. That wasn't quite true, but the reality was almost as bad. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, who would later be the author of The Everglades River of Grass, described Miami Beach during the hurricane as isolated in a sea of raving white water. In downtown Miami, meteorologist Richard Gray of the Weather Bureau had raised the red and black signal flag at 11:30 p.m. the evening before as the hurricane approached. Even then, he would later report the force of the wind knocked him off his feet and let him down none too gently. Gray had remained at his post in the three-story federal building all through the night, despite the lights failing. About 4 a.m., he discovered that the weather station's rain gauge had been blown completely away. A portion of it would later be found on the roof of a nearby building. The torrent of rain eased slightly as daylight approached, but at 5:30, a deluge of water descended. One observer likened it to the flow from a fire hose. 20 minutes later, meteorologist Gray had to frantically recalibrate his barometer when the instrument's needle slipped off the bottom of his chart. The adjusted reading showed a barometric pressure of 27.6, the lowest ever recorded in the history of the U.S. Weather Bureau, according to the Daily News. Survivors would recall a continuous howl of wind, punctuated by intermittent crashes from falling buildings, breaking glass, and flying debris. Sirens wailed in the background as fire engines and ambulances struggled to make their way through debris-clogged streets. What little visibility there was hampered by driving rain. About 6:15, with sunrise still nearly an hour away, the eye of the hurricane arrived. Winds fell to just 10 miles an hour at Miami's Weather Bureau office, and suddenly the howling and crashing ceased. The calm was deceptive and deadly. Most of those who perished met their fate when they went out during the lull between 6 and 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. The streets were filled with people curious to view the wreckage, but the calm would last for less than an hour. By 6:47 a.m., winds were gale force again, and when the wind shifted, it was more furious than before and did even greater damage. Daybreak arrived officially at 7:07 that morning, though heavy clouds continued to obscure the sun. By 8 a.m., Miami streets were awash under as much as 2 feet of water. Over on Miami Beach, the anemometer on the roof of the Allison Hotel blew away at 8:12 a.m. after hitting 120-mile-an-hour winds. The storm tide at both Miami and Miami Beach peaked 8 to 9 feet above normal. Miami Beach was inundated, with the waves depositing several feet of sand on streets and inside buildings. On the mainland, the entire waterfront flooded. Water stood 3 to 5 feet deep inside hotels and homes near the bay. Boats were propelled inland and then deposited 2 to 3 blocks from the bay. A sub-chaser, blown clear from its moorings, was dropped unceremoniously in Royal Palm Park. Adding to the destruction, an 11-foot surge up the Miami River damaged boats that had sought safe anchorage there and crested the banks, flooding the northwestern part of the city. A canal at Hialeah also overflowed. At long last, the hurricane started to ebb about 2 that afternoon. Residents could begin to catch their breath after 11 hours of torment. Frazzled survivors, many wearing bathing suits, began wading the flooded streets around 3 p.m., surveying the damage. Some searched anxiously for missing relatives or checked on their neighbors. Others shook their heads or cried as they inspected their homes and businesses. Some who'd had the clothes literally ripped off their backs went in search of something to wear. Meteorologists would eventually classify Miami's catastrophic hurricane as a Category 4, 1 notch shy of the severest ratings. Wind speeds had reached at least 130 miles an hour, and some claimed as much as 136 or even 140 miles an hour. The storm surge brought the ocean more than 11 feet above mean sea level at Biscayne Boulevard, and the hurricane would go down in history as the 12th strongest and deadliest storm of the 20th century.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, as I'm listening to this, the thing that's going through my mind is what motivates storm chasers? Do you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on that? I mean, would you want to chase a storm like that?
I certainly wouldn't want to chase a storm like that. I don't even think I'd want to be in one like that. And how terrifying for the people who had no notice it was coming. They weren't there voluntarily.
Yes,
Just like they put themselves in harm's way. They just sort of
definitely.
woke up in the middle of the night, and then all the lights go out. They have no lights. They have no
Hmm.
telephone. They kind of don't know what's happening, except it's obvious it's a huge, gigantic storm. And
Right.
many of the buildings at the time were not built to withstand that kind of force of wind.
Hmm.
They didn't have.
So, did your grandmother, your father's mother, know not to go out during the lull, or where did they ride that out?
I think they did know that. I'm not positive about that, but I think they did know that. He would mention that it was really bad. The lull came and people were often hit because they didn't realize it was just the lull and it would come back. The force of the winds
Hmm.
would come back. I think she realized as the water kept rising that this wasn't going to get any better. We had to find safer ground, higher ground. and clearly
Hmm.
they went in search of that, and probably also in search of companionship. I can imagine she had two, no, three little kids with her,
Hmm.
and they had to find some place where there were some other adults around.
Yeah.
It's kind of a sad story. My grandfather had left the family about 5 years earlier, I think it was. So it was just the two women in the household. It was my grandmother and her mother, and my dad and his
Okay.
two younger siblings. So here, these two women with these little kids, trying to, in the middle
Hmm.
of a storm, trying to find shelter. It must have been really terrifying.
So with this building that they took shelter in, it was an unfinished apartment building. Did they
Yes.
go like up to the 10th floor or something like that
You know, I
to
wish I
stay above
had.
the water?
I wish I still had them to ask more questions of. And this is one of the sad things, right? You ask the questions at the time that you think you want to know, and then people pass
Oh,
away and you don't get a chance to ask them anymore. I don't know what level it was, but apparently there were a lot of people who sought shelter in that same building and it was
okay.
multi-story. I'm guessing, given that it was 1926, it was probably not more than 4 or 5 stories tall, if that. I'm guessing it was more like 2 or 3 stories.
Right.
I was able to find out where it was. It was located near. I talk about it in the book. It was, my dad said it was a pseudo-Spanish village, so his
Hmm.
it was near that. And a historian in Miami was able to help me identify which. It was a tourist resort, which tourist resort it was that they were next to. So I know kind of where they were, but I don't know exactly which building. Yeah.
Okay. Is that building still in existence?
I don't know. Certainly the
Oh,
Spanish Village is not, and I'm guessing it's
okay.
been long enough that the apartment building is not. But again, I don't know exactly which building it was.
Right. Well,
Um,
some apartment buildings do last 100 years, some of
yeah,
them much longer.
it'd be fun to go
So
look for it, wouldn't it? Yeah.
it would be really neat to
I'm
see where
going to
your dad
Miami in
lived
October. I should make a trip there and try to see if I can. My
You
cousin
should.
is going to. I'm going to try and see if I can find that. That would be neat.
Yeah, and I would love to hear about that if you find the
Oh,
building or find
I'll
out
take
what
a picture.
happened to it. That would be
Yes.
really neat. I wanted to ask, is the book focusing on your dad's experience? Is it a whole bunch of different people's experiences? Is it more about the hurricane itself or safety or structures or
So it's a story about the storm itself, and my dad's story is just a little piece of that. That's why I got
Mhm.
interested in it. I did mention him in the introduction to it, but it's really more about the storm itself. It does include the true stories of three other people who published their stories after it, wrote down what they
Okay.
had it gone through. So people who are not members of my family, but had some very dramatic experiences. And I have one of those to read for you when we get there. So it
You can
includes
go
that.
ahead and read it now.
Okay, and the other thing that it has is a lot of pictures. So there's a lot of the
Okay.
images which are just very telling and very striking from images that I collected. Okay, so this is the story of Dr. George E. Woolard, who had a Coral Gables office. He was a medical doctor, and ironically, he had just finished moving his belongings into a two-room apartment adjoining his office the day before the hurricane. And this is what he wrote about his experience. He said, I was seated in my private office that eventful Friday night after dinner reading the paper when the phone rang. One of the vice presidents of the Coral Gables Corporation advised me of the predicted storm. So he was one of the few who did get notice that there was a storm coming. This was about 7:30 o'clock and it was just barely dark. I went out and bought a paper and upon reading it called in my night watchman and told him to make sure that all the doors and windows were securely locked and barred and went with him to supervise the same. Then I went back to my reading, confident that at the most it would only be about as bad as the flurry we had in July, which, although it deposited several inches of sand in the office and wetted the rugs badly, did no serious or permanent damage. So they had had a previous hurricane that July, and that was also part of why people were just sort of blasé about this one.
Right.
About 10 o'clock, the wind was getting pretty high, and I went out. I noticed that the ocean was rising rapidly and the water already was coming under the doors. It was only a short time before I noticed that the rugs were being lifted and, putting my hand down, felt the water to be about 12 inches deep. And I decided, therefore, to change into my bathing suit. So people were very practical about that. This must have been about midnight. I had no record of time for the next 2 days. About this time, the lights went out, and, finding matches, I lit a candle, which was in one of the wrought iron candelabra. The water was still gradually rising, and in the outer office I could hear huge waves swishing in great torrents, when all of a sudden I heard an awful crash. Opening the door to the outer office, I saw that the front doors had given way, and huge waves were coming in, carrying out furniture on their return. Foolishly, it seems to me now, I rushed over and tried to close them and hold them. The noise of the water was so great that nothing else could be heard. It was all I could do to retain an upright position, even by holding onto the walls. At this time, the remaining doors and windows crashed in at intervals until all were gone on the ocean side. I was bewildered and did not know which way to turn. I was just about to return to my private office when a great wave came in from two directions, one from the ocean side and the other from 23rd Street, and a big bundle rolled up at my feet and a light flashed. I helped this bundle scramble to its feet, and it turned out to be a policeman who had been on duty outside the Roni Plaza Hotel. He told me that he'd been trying to make his way along when a huge wave picked him up and deposited him right at my feet. We made our way back to the lounge, the northern window of which was still intact. We sat in armchairs for a while, and then suddenly this one remaining window crashed, and I could feel the floor trembling. The water rose so high that the chairs on which we were sitting were floating, and when I felt the floor quiver, I grabbed the policeman's wrist and bellowed to him to follow me. We could see the trees going by uprooted, huge coconut palms as well as roofs of houses. I knew not where we were going, but it must have been divine providence that directed me to the only room the door of which still held as I rushed through, still leading the policeman. I reached back and pulled the huge Pecky Cypress door closed behind me to prevent the waves coming in. The policeman now held his torch, which was a flashlight, in his helmet. As the water was up to our waists, we had to climb upon the table, where we sat until it rose so high that we had to stand. Minutes now seemed like hours, and although we scarcely spoke a word, the knowledge that we were not absolutely alone was some comfort to both of us. The water rose rapidly, and the most welcome sight anyone ever saw was dawn. We had been forced to stand on the table and hang onto the chandelier, and from this point the water rose steadily until it was at our chins, with our heads touching the ceiling. We could go no higher, and I told the policeman that if a lull came for only a few minutes, I was going to make a break for it. How, I had no idea. But he protested it would be suicidal, as roofs were going by on the wind, and 4 were lying in what remained of the Roman pools, and the debris was still racing by the windows at a terrific rate. I stepped off the table and swam under a door to a small closet adjoining this room. On coming to the top, I was overjoyed to see the window there had not been blocked by debris. If I could smash it, I could get out and possibly make my escape getting into the solarium. I swam back and reported to him. He could not see it, but we finally agreed that I was to go, and if I should be swept away, he would attempt to recover me. I took his pistol, and swimming under, after shaking hands with him, I reached the windowsill. After trying twice unsuccessfully, I finally smashed the window and then the screen, dropped the revolver, and gingerly stepped from the window. I had, however, barely got my right leg and arm through before I was picked up as though I had been nothing and thrown bodily back into the pile of debris and my piano. I picked myself up and, clinging to the balcony above me, made my way hand over hand to the windows of the salon. The wind now was coming from the south at terrific force, making it difficult for me to retain my hold. Finally tearing me loose altogether, it hurled me through the windows and up against a marble fountain in the center of the solarium. I made my way, swimming and crawling, to the mantelpiece where I rested. The tide now was receding, and the waters in the office also were going with it very fast. Finally, I swam and walked, where the sand was exceptionally high, to the door of the room where the policeman was still held a prisoner. My hand hit something metallic, which turned out to be a frying pan, with which I gradually dug him out. The wind was still raging, so we could not stand erect. We made our way to the mantel. At noon on Saturday, we were finally rescued and taken out after having been in the water for over 10 hours. I had nothing but a bathing suit on, and even this was partly torn off, and for the next 4 weeks I was forced to live in a borrowed one. He actually was a medical doctor, and after he had basically had everything, literally everything he had swept away, he went to work doing medical relief work after the hurricane, and he would discover 3 days after the storm that he had suffered 6 broken ribs during his escape.
Oh my. It's a miracle he lived at all.
I know, it just gives you goosebumps to hear it in his own.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Got
So those are the kinds
goosebumps
of
all over
stories that
now.
I included. Yeah, the personal stories are very moving. Yeah, it kind of puts you there.
They're, like I said, miraculous, and it kind of brings me back to I had a rough 6 weeks where a lot of things I should have been dead approximately twice and maybe had my arm
Whoa.
ripped off by 2 dogs. It was
Oh,
just a bad 6 weeks here.
no.
But two of them, well, I mean, it's, it's miraculous that a ram charged over me, knocked me flat on my back, and I wasn't even sore the next day. And then a few weeks after that, I think the UTV was next. Something went out on it. We tried to rock it to get it into gear, and instead it came flying backward at me. And just like that, I was on my back next to it. I don't even know how I got there.
Wow.
And then I tried to get in the middle of two dogs fighting, and
Oh,
still
not
have a
good.
scar on my arm.
Yeah.
But,
Oh.
things like that happen, and I would guess many people in the course of their lives do experience that, but this is a
Hmm.
whole nother level that what floor were they on?
He was near the Roni Plaza, and I think the buildings there were 3 stories. So I'm guessing he was a
Okay,
second story, and maybe a first story. So,
okay.
yep.
But he was still in his own office.
He was still, you know what? He must have been first story because of the way he talks about the water coming in. So, but it was an
Okay.
office, and apparently he built a little apartment in the back of the office. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And there are pictures in the book that show what the sand looked like right outside where he would have been. And they were like
Mm-hmm.
3 foot piles of sand that were left after the
Yeah.
waves retreated.
Yeah.
So it
You
must
know,
have
it really made me wonder listening to this. It reminded me of watching Titanic, and
been.
I'm kind of curious, why is a story like this? I mean, we don't really see movies or fiction say about Katrina, do we? Think?
I don't know if there are any, and
Okay.
and honestly, it wouldn't be the kind of thing that I would watch. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of, it's tragic and it's horrifying and it's sad, and for the people who went through it, it was very sad. Um,
Right.
to me, part of the joy of this book is the happiness of the survivors. I'm talking about the positiveness of the survivors, the positiveness
Mm-hmm.
of the community coming back together. And I do talk about that in the book about how people came, the Red Cross was there, they made sandwiches, they distributed milk to children, they sent relief trains from all over the country, gathered supplies and sent them down, sent doctors and nurses. And it was kind
Mm-hmm.
of a heartwarming story about the way people came together. And I imagine there are
Right.
stories like that about Katrina as well, about the community coming together and trying to rebuild. Now that I would watch. That would be interesting to me.
Right. Right. Um, so Claridge, am I saying it right? Your publishing company?
Claritage? So
Okay.
I named my self-publishing company Claritage, which is my mother's name, Claire, and the word
Mm-hmm.
heritage kind of put together because
Claritage, that's right.
heritage,
That's
right?
right.
Because my first
And
book was about history, right?
right. Do you publish all your books under
I
Claritage or
do.
just your history?
I
Okay.
No, I
Okay.
pushed all of them to Claritage, right?
Right. But it started for history and local history. And talk a little bit about why these stories are so important, why remembering history
Oh,
and other people's history, even the more
right.
minor stories of history, why is that so important?
Well, I think, I mean, sort of the obvious reason, if we don't tell the stories, they don't get preserved. And people do pass on. I mean, my dad is long gone, and if his story hadn't been captured in some way, his family wouldn't have it. I've done an awful lot of oral histories. One of the other books that I wrote and published was a book called Write Your Memoir from Stuck to Finished, because people often get stuck in the process of writing their family histories.
Hmm.
It's a tough occupation. It's a tough thing to do, to sit down and capture that stuff, especially if you're not a writer by nature, by talent.
Right.
And yet it is so important because those stories do go away. And one of the things we've talked about ourselves and other people, of course, is there's multiple ways to capture stories. It doesn't have to be in print.
Hmm.
You could do it like this. You could do it with a camera or on a tape
Right.
recorder or something. But again, if we
Hmm.
don't capture them, they're gone. The stories are gone forever. And even I'm finding, as we talked about today, I wish there were, I wish I could go back and ask questions of these people that I didn't. But at least I captured what I did, and I think
Right.
it's really important. And it's important for the families, but it's also kind of important for the communities. So when you're talking about things like Miami, this is a part of Miami history that many people who live there now don't know about. And
Right.
it's a real interesting part of its history. And when they deal with some of the new building codes, this is part of why they have those building codes. It's a part of understanding
Right.
that background. Yeah. So
Well,
have
I
you?
think, I'm thinking about, say, a 17, 18-year-old who is just looking at, what job am I going to get? I don't care. I just want to
Mm,
go out running or playing games, whatever they
right.
want to do. How would you convince them that knowing what happened in 1870 matters?
That's a
How
really
does
tough
it
call,
affect?
yeah. That's a really tough call. Um, I was never interested in history in high school as a kid either. I mean, it was really boring. And a lot of what they do with history, at least when I was growing up, was memorization. So the names and the
Yes,
dates and the wars and the
it was
kings.
dry.
It was very
Hmm.
dry. It was really boring. And I think part of what makes history interesting are the people stories. So when you read about who
Yes,
people were and what they went through and how they survived what they went through, that makes history kind of a whole different ballgame. It's really interesting at that point.
right.
And I think treasure stories are an interesting hook for teenagers in particular. So
Hmm.
stories about the Comstock Lode and places like Silver Mountain City, which was the silver mining town where I grew up,
Right.
the stories of those people and what they had to survive when they were there and finding treasure and then losing treasure, those are the kind of
Hmm.
stories that will appeal to kids. And I think that we had a friend over who talked about the history of roses with our little local history group the other day. And who thought that there was a history to roses? But she was talking about the kings and the queens in England and how they had fights
Hmm.
over rose varieties and how there was a
Really?
king's it was really a fun story. There was a king's mistress and there was a rose named after the mistress and the wife was
Hmm.
horrified by this and arranged supposedly
Uh-huh.
potentially kill the mistress. Those are the kinds of stories
Over a rose they
over a
named after
rose,
her.
over a
That's
rose.
wild.
And then it ties into the history of the War of the Roses. And we've all heard about the War of the Roses. Well, this is a peripheral story to that. But that makes history interesting. So,
It does. And I think we learn a lot about human nature too,
yes.
if we let
Yeah.
ourselves. And
Yeah.
I think that's so important, especially today. We're so divided. And if you can
Yeah.
start reading other people's stories, I think we have a lot to learn from them.
Yeah. I think it.
So, what are you working on next?
Oh, I'm working on another book in
That
my murder mystery series, and we
okay,
talked about that by email. It's interesting how many connections we have to Tennessee. So you're in Tennessee. I have a sister who's in Tennessee, and my next
okay,
book is set in Jonesboro, Tennessee. So this is
okay.
a story about Zoe who lives in the van with her African gray parrot, and it's
Mhm.
going to involve actually history here. She's tracking down a Civil War treasure, a buried treasure from the Civil War, and she's
Mhm.
also tracking down a modern day. This is not a time travel, but the story dates back to a hidden treasure that came from the Civil War. And in the modern day, she's also trying to find out what happened to a missing 93-year-old gentleman who was looking for that treasure. So
So is this kind of a time travel, or it's
it's
more
it's
she's researching the past?
it's more just a murder mystery,
Okay.
kind of a mystery having to do with what happened to this treasure. So it starts in
Hmm.
the Civil War era. There's a little piece of it that talks about the how the treasure got stolen in the first place, and
Uh-huh.
then the rest of the book is modern day about there's this gentleman who was hunting for the treasure and then he turns up missing, and Zoe comes to town and
Hmm.
she's got to look for him and then incidentally find the treasure as well. So
Okay.
it's gonna be a fun book.
And what would be your best advice to writers or people
Oh.
who want to write a book?
Oh, I think the best advice is always just to remember that writers write, and we all have excuses. And the hardest thing about being a writer in the entire world is to plunk your butt in the chair and actually do the writing. And we just have to overcome that initial inertia and force ourselves to do it. I think
Right.
everybody, even somebody who's written as many books as I have, it's a little bit of a struggle. Sometimes we're excited about what we're writing, sometimes we're not. It's a
Hmm.
little bit of a struggle to stay consistent. And the best advice
Yeah.
is to do what works for you to keep yourself on a schedule. So for me, what works is a calendar. And I am sort of driven by lists and calendars, and that gets me in my chair. I know it's an artificial deadline, it's a self-set deadline, but it gets me to sit down and actually produce. And sometimes there's a little
Hmm.
slippage, but at least more or less I stick with it. So that's my best advice.
Um, so would that kind of be your answer to time management, since you clearly manage your time very well and get a lot done?
I get a lot done. I'm very pretty productive. Yeah, lists are actually I wrote a book about lists. It's
Hmm.
lists are my secret weapon. I think making a list and sticking with it, whether it's a chronology kind of a list or a calendar list, but
Right.
a
My
to-do
list
list,
is
whatever.
varied. Yeah.
Yeah, lists
I
are
just
important.
printed up another list today
Yeah,
that I'm
keeps you on
working through.
track. Yeah, and you don't always cross off what you intended to, but at least it reminds you of what you have to do and sort of their nagging.
Right, right.
Yeah.
This or the story of my life, but lately I feel like it's more put out the biggest fire first and
Sometimes, yeah,
just
and
throw it off the table, you know?
you have
But
dogs to separate. Yeah, I know, things happen, right? Water leaks.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so just because, as you said, we seem to have all these connections, music and
Yeah.
Tennessee and gardening. What are you growing in your garden?
Oh, and I am not the gardener. So full disclosure here, I am not the gardener. My
Oh,
husband
okay.
is definitely the gardener. We have about 4 acres here, and he sort of manicures all of it. It's beautiful here.
Okay.
So he's got a lot of flowers and that kind of thing, but he also has a huge tomato garden. So I think he said he's got 63 tomato plants at the current time, which is down from his 77 tomato plants last year. So he's a huge tomato grower, but peppers and we have asparagus, we have fruit trees, so we have peaches that are going to be wonderful this year. The peach trees are loaded, and apples, and the
Hmm.
pear trees died. They didn't like it here. We have this little microclimate. They didn't like it, but we'll certainly be inundated with peaches. And what else does he grow? Basil, things like.
We have Okay. had a ton of rain, so gigantic onions. I went out there one day and we've got these zucchinis like the size of, I don't know, an elephant's trunk or something. They're massive. And I've already diced one into like 5 million pieces, and we're going to be working on these zucchinis and onions for a long